There's a rusted steel drum behind an old barn somewhere in rural Pennsylvania right now, and it's been quietly cooking for 3 days straight. No open flame, just heat radiating off the metal and a faint blue wisp of smoke slipping out through a small punched hole in the lid. What comes out of that drum by the weekend is worth several times more than the wood that went into it, and that wood was likely free, hauled off a job site by a tree service that was happy to get rid of it. 2 centuries ago, this exact process supported entire rural economies across America. The person who ran it was called a collier, and without him, colonial blacksmiths had no fuel, ironworks had no fire, and households had no reliable heat source for cooking. At Hopewell Furnace National Historic Site in Berks County, Pennsylvania, preserved today by the National Park Service, you can still walk across the flat circular hearths cut into the hillside where colliers built their charcoal mounds between 1771 and the 1880s. A collier would stack cordwood into a dome roughly the size of a small shed, seal it completely with damp earth and leaves, light a fire inside, and then tend that mound around the clock for up to 2 weeks straight, sleeping beside it, reading the color of the smoke to know exactly when the wood had finished converting into charcoal. This trade quietly vanished from American life within a single generation, and the reason has a name attached to it, and it isn't a mystery. It's Henry Ford. Building the Model T meant manufacturing enormous quantities of wooden components, floorboards, spokes, and framing, and that meant running sawmills that produced staggering amounts of waste wood, scraps, stumps, and sawdust piling up faster than anyone could use it. Henry Ford reportedly hated waste on principle, so in the early 1920s, he built a sawmill and processing plant in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan near Iron Mountain, and the local real estate broker who helped assemble the timberland deal was a man named Edward G. Kingsford, who happened to be a relative of Ford's by marriage. The plant took leftover mill scrap, charred it, ground it, pressed it with a binder into small uniform lumps, and sold the resulting product, briquettes, directly through Ford's own car dealerships. You could walk in, buy a Model T, and walk out with a bag of charcoal from the same salesman. The town that grew up around that operation was named Kingsford, Michigan, and the Kingsford charcoal brand still sits on grocery store shelves across the country today, according to company history published by Kingsford Products itself. Within about 2 decades, an entire regional craft, hand-built by colliers over generations, was displaced not because it produced an inferior product, but because a corporation figured out how to package convenience and sell it in bulk. Then decades later, a second and completely unrelated pressure sealed the deal, as growing concern over urban air quality led counties and states across the country to regulate open burning, and a 2-week earthen mound smoking in the open air fell squarely into that category. The craft didn't lose on quality, it lost the distribution fight, and then it got caught in a rulebook written for an entirely different problem. Before going any further, here's what genuinely matters if you're going to try this yourself. Open burning regulations are set locally, not federally, meaning your county, your municipality, and in some states your regional air quality management district all have separate rules, and some jurisdictions distinguish clearly between open piles and sealed retort systems, like a covered drum or purpose-built kiln, where smoke is contained and largely combusted rather than released directly into the air. One phone call to your local fire marshal or county extension office clarifies this in minutes and protects everything you build afterward. Second, and this one is non-negotiable, charring wood in a low-oxygen environment produces carbon monoxide, an odorless, colorless gas that the CDC identifies as responsible for hundreds of accidental deaths in the United States every year according to National Center for Health Statistics mortality data. This process happens outdoors only, never in a garage, shed, or under any attached roof structure, with clear space around the burn and good airflow at all times. Third, a drum full of active charcoal holds serious heat for many hours after visible smoke stops, so clear ground, accessible water, and never leaving an active burn unattended overnight until you fully understand how your particular setup behaves are basic non-negotiables, not suggestions. A single controlled burn doesn't produce one product, it produces several, and most beginners throw half of them away without realizing it. Start with the broken fragments and dust that settle at the bottom of every batch, the stuff every new charcoal maker assumes is a failed batch. That fraction is biochar, and its value has a 2,000-year track record. In the Amazon basin, researchers including soil scientists at Cornell University have extensively studied patches of unusually dark, fertile soil called terra preta, Portuguese for black earth, created by pre-Columbian populations who worked charcoal, pottery fragments, and organic waste into the ground over generations. Centuries after those societies disappeared, that soil remains dramatically more fertile than untouched ground nearby, and the mechanism is structural, not nutritional, since charcoal's porous surface holds water and nutrients, while giving soil microbes a stable place to live rather than acting as a fertilizer itself. The critical mistake almost everyone makes is selling or using biochar raw, straight from the fire, because uncharged biochar actively pulls nitrogen out of surrounding soil during its first season, temporarily starving whatever you plant near it. The fix is simple and well documented by agricultural extension programs. Soak the biochar in compost tea or diluted manure for 2 to 3 weeks before it ever touches a garden bed. Once charged, it becomes a genuinely valuable soil amendment for organic growers, orchards, and vineyards where water retention is a real annual cost. The second overlooked product isn't solid at all, it's the smoke itself. In Japan, that condensed vapor has been collected and sold commercially for centuries under the name mokusaku, or wood vinegar, referenced in older chemical literature as pyrolinous acid. When wood breaks down under heat, it releases water vapor loaded with organic compounds, primarily acetic acid, along with methanol and various phenolic compounds. Route that vapor through a length of cooled pipe, and it condenses into a dark amber liquid. In traditional and modern organic Japanese agriculture, diluted mokusaku has long been used as a soil drench and foliar spray, and Japan's Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries has documented its continued commercial production and use across the country. The critical skill here is knowing which fraction to collect, since the very first liquid off a cold start is watery and heavily loaded with tar, while the very last runs thick with creosote, meaning only the stable middle run collected once a burn has fully settled is worth bottling, and serious producers let that liquid settle and filter for weeks before use. Sold honestly as a horticultural soil treatment rather than anything health-related, wood vinegar taps into the exact same buyer as biochar, meaning one relationship with an organic grower can support 2 separate product lines. The bulk of a burn's value comes from the finished lump charcoal itself, and it has 2 distinct, dedicated buyer groups. Traditional blacksmiths and bladesmiths need clean hardwood charcoal because, unlike mineral coal, it contains essentially no sulfur, a genuinely important detail since sulfur migrating into hot steel can embrittle a blade or ruin a forge weld, a concern documented extensively in metalworking and blacksmithing trade publications. Separately, serious barbecue cooks and competition teams favor pure hardwood lump over briquettes specifically because lump lights faster, burns hotter, and contains none of the binders or fillers found in a pressed briquette. Both buyer groups share something that protects a small local producer from big distributors. Lump charcoal is fragile and breaks easily in shipping, meaning a bag handled across multiple warehouses often arrives half dust, which is exactly why buyers value a local source who hands them an intact bag. At the very top of this market sits something almost nobody in America produces: binchotan, Japanese white charcoal, most famously Kishu binchotan, made in the Kishu region of Wakayama Prefecture from Ube oak, and named historically after the Edo period merchant Bichu Choman, who popularized the product in the late 1600s, according to regional craft histories preserved by Wakayama Prefecture's cultural heritage records. What sets it apart is the finishing process, fired to extremely high temperature at the very end, then pulled glowing from the kiln and rapidly quenched in a mix of damp ash and sand, producing an exceptionally dense charcoal that burns for hours with almost no smoke or flare-up, which is exactly why yakitori and robotaiyaki restaurants worldwide depend on it for cooking skewers directly over open coals for an entire dinner service. American oak or hickory can't replicate true Kishu binchotan, since Ubaim oak is regionally specific, but a domestically produced white charcoal using the same high heat quench method, sold honestly as a local alternative, competes directly against restaurants currently paying international shipping costs on imported Japanese charcoal, and one strong relationship with a single serious restaurant kitchen is worth more than 100 bags sold at a farmer's market. Combine the biochar, the wood vinegar, the standard forge and cooking lump, and even an occasional white charcoal batch for a local chef, and a single part-time backyard operation, run seasonally and honestly, can realistically generate several hundred to a few $1,000s a month depending on the season, built entirely from waste wood that someone else was already paying to get rid of. If this history and this trade genuinely surprised you, subscribe, because there are more forgotten backyard crafts like this one, still sitting quietly behind sheds all across the country, waiting for someone to relight them.